In our last video, we started looking at the vantage point area. And if you recall, we looked at the station here, the Port Huron Northwestern Station. This station burned in 1912. And if you recall, the station was located just south of Court Street, toward the end of Court Street. But there was also another railroad station that was on the north side of Court Street. And that was this station here. This was the Pierre Marquette railroad station, and later became the Chesapeake and Ohio station. You can see the Port Huron signage hanging from the roof, and you also see these railway carts. I love these carts. I remember them when they were at the tunnel station. Well, this station did not burn down. As a matter of fact, it's still there today, and in pretty good shape, I might add. Of course, there's no tracks today near the station, but at one time, as you can see from this picture, there are tracks right in front of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a railroad station. And you can see the Pierre Marquette Bridge in the background. Actually, this whole area of Vantage Point was filled with railroad tracks. As you can see from this photograph here, all the tracks, and then of course you can see the car ferry, the railroad car ferry there on the bottom. This photograph gives you a great overall view of Vantage Point area. You can see the different tracks there in the area, and then of course if you look here where the two rivers meet, that corner was used by contractors over the years. For a long time, J.H. Baker owned that, and at one time Foster even used it. But there's, as far as I know, I can all remember these piles of gravel and sand there. At least probably back until the late 1800s or early 1900s. And then if you look just up here as we zoom in, you can see the Pierre Marquette railroad station as well. That would be the building with the light color roof. This gives you a little different view of that corner, but you can see it's basically the same type of business. This photograph looks like it might have been taken from the top of the bridge. But it gives you a good view looking south across Black River. You can see the train yard, and you can see that spur going off to the left. That was for the railroad ferry. And if you look off in the distance, you can see the second railroad platform where they loaded the cars onto the ferry as well. This photograph here, you can see the one ferry is already docked, either waiting to load cars or just unloading cars. The other ferry looks like it's just waiting there to take its turn. Here's a similar view from the ground level, and you can see the other ferry waiting there, and this one here is either loading or unloading. And this photo, as well as some of the other ones you'll see today, is from the T.J. Gaffney collection, which is much appreciated. If it wasn't for Mr. Gaffney, much of the railroad history of this area would be lost. The car ferries changed over the years from the early swing-type ferries that ran between Fort Gratiot and Point Edward to what ended up being right there at Vantage Point. But once they got their original format, they didn't change a whole lot. For example, we don't have a picture of the swing ferries, but we do have a picture of the ferry that replaced the swing ferry in 1872. Which was the International shown here. The second ferry was added in 1875, and this was the Huron that you see pictured here. The format that I talked about earlier on these ferries was basically 3 tracks on a ferry, and you can see the middle track going down without any obstruction, but then of course the other ones went around the support pillars on the ferry. They would eventually get away from these obstacles on the later model ferries. You can see that this ferry here, the Great Western Grand Trunk Ferry, was a side-wheeler, and it looks a little different than the first ferries you looked at. Some of the early ferries were made out of wood, such as this one that ran to Mackinac, St. Ignace, and they had the sides put on this one. I don't think originally it had the sides on it, but these were added later. And this ferry, of course, didn't run between Port Huron and Sarnia, but it did stop in Port Huron, and that's what this picture is showing here. Exactly where in Port Huron, I don't know, but you can see the crowd looking at it. This was a Port Huron Sarnia ferry of the Chesapeake and Ohio, and you can see they got away from the obstructions. You can still see the 3 tracks, but these tracks are now going straight right across the whole ferry. This photograph, the caption said it was taken at the foot of Griswold Street. I'm not sure why it would have been at Griswold Street, unless perhaps they were just trying to get close to the southern dock, because you can see it looks like the same ferry here at that southern point where they loaded the rail cars. As we mentioned when we were doing the series on the tunnel on the ferry system at that time, the ferry system was needed because there was no tunnel originally. And then when the tunnel was built, they discontinued the ferry service. And then as the cars got larger with the double-decker cars and so forth that would no longer fit in the tunnel, then they went back to the ferry system again. These next few photographs that we'll be looking at here will be the Chesapeake and Ohio inaugural, which was December 11th, 1953. At least that's what all the captions say on these photographs. And it gives you kind of a neat experience of that ferry coming into the dock, and there's some people there waiting for the celebration of that event, I guess. But it was cold. It was in December, so there weren't too many people there. And here we see loading the cars up. This photograph here gives you an idea of the size, the height of these cars and why they wouldn't fit through the tunnel. But of course, once the new tunnel was built, these ferries were no longer needed once again. This gives you a nice view of what it was like from the view from the pilot house. You can see the cars all loaded up, the double-deckers, and of course the other ferry already at the dock. Most modern of all the ferries, and the latest ferry, I believe, is the C&N ferries. Here you have one pictured coming across the river. And in this photo here, you can see the simplicity of these ferries. I mean, not near as complicated as the early ones where you had to go around obstacles and so forth. You see the switching is all done in the foreground, and the tracks are straight away. And the pilot house still has a great view of what's going on. Here's a little better picture of the track configuration, the switching and so forth in the foreground. And you can see the ferry there waiting to be unloaded. What you see next is a film clip of the car ferry service in Port Huron, and also mixed in with it is Detroit. But the first part of it is Port Huron, but I wanted to show you how these cars were loaded at a close-up look, and that would be in the Detroit area. But it was the same here, we just don't have a film of it. So take a look at this, I think you may enjoy it. I don't know who to give credit to this film for. I did find it on YouTube, but it didn't say anything about who actually shot it. That was the railroad bridge you just saw flash by you there, and here is the station that we were looking at earlier, and looking up this street here, this would be Court Street. And of course this era was when we had all the diesel engines. You can see the ferry platform in the background coming up here, and we'll switch over to another clip here. You can see the C&N ferry waiting at the dock. And here we're looking toward the north. That's the bridge, here Marquette Railroad Bridge. And we see the traffic movement in the switchyard here. It's always easy to spot these ferries. That pilot house is so high. It's very easy to see. Now we're looking at the ferry on the other side of the river. And quite a line of cars waiting for it. Okay, this clip here is actually the Detroit River that was included in this YouTube video. But it gives you a good idea of how these cars go on the ferries, and so I thought you might enjoy seeing this. It also gives you an idea how high those cars were and why they wouldn't fit into the old tunnel. And here's the switchman waiting for the cars to clear the switch, and then he'll flip the switch to be able to put those cars alongside the other cars on the ferry. Okay, looks like we got a full load. And away we go. These ferry loading platforms that were so important to the rail industry, getting the cars across the river. So busy at one time, now just lay dormant. And eventually they became an eyesore, especially when they start fixing up Vantage Point and Riverwalk going down there, which looked very nice, except when you came to the loading platforms, and they were nice, or even if you knew the history of it, it was still kind of an eyesore. And who would have thought that eventually it would look like this? What a wonderful improvement, and yet kept the history of the rail yard that was once here in Vantage Point. Today, Vantage Point looks like this. But those of us that are of a certain age remember that it used to look like this, a very vibrant rail yard. Join me in my next video and we'll look at what else might have been in this area.